Hey guys, tonight we are taking a very, very slow ride with the original sun god, Apollo, and exploring a side of his daily commute rarely mentioned in the heroic epics, how his magnificent, fiery sun chariot might have caused some truly epic traffic jams across ancient Greece. Picture this: you're a humble olive farmer, a philosopher trying to ponder the imponderable, or maybe just a goat herder with a penchant for staring at the sky. It's just before dawn. A hush lies over the land. And then, far away in the east, a faint glow. It intensifies, and suddenly, bam! Apollo bursts over the horizon in a blaze of glory so bright it makes you drop your breakfast amphora of watered-down wine. His chariot, pulled by four snorting, fire-breathing steeds, isn't just bringing the daylight, it's bringing a whole celestial heap of potential disruptions to your otherwise tranquil, pre-traffic cone existence. You think rush hour on the Acropolis Ring Road is bad? Try dealing with a divine fender bender involving a solar flare and a wayward griffin. Honestly, given the sheer horsepower involved and the occasionally distractible nature of its divine driver, you probably won't survive a week of this celestial commute without at least one singed toga or a very confused flock of sheep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support, however small, helps keep these historical deep dives, or perhaps gentle meanders, going. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these sleepy tales travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your ancient Greek day, or rather the very beginning of it, doesn't just start, it's announced with a cosmic flourish that could give modern-day alarm clocks a run for their money. But before Apollo even gets his golden chariot onto the celestial highway, there's the pre-dawn rush hour in the stables of Olympus, or wherever it is that sun steeds are kitted out. Imagine the scene: it's still dark, a few sleepy stars are blinking out, and the air is probably thick with the smell of ambrosia-laced coffee and high-octane nectar. The hooray goddesses of the seasons and the heavenly gates are bustling about, trying to get Apollo's four fiery horses, Ethon, Eos, Phlegon, and Pyroeus, names that basically mean blazing, dawnward, burning, and fiery, no prizes for guessing their elemental alignment, harnessed to the golden chariot. These aren't your placid, field-grazing ponies. These are immortal, fire-breathing equines with tempers as hot as their breath. There's probably a fair bit of divine cursing, the clang of celestial bronze as buckles are fastened, and the impatient snorting of beasts eager to unleash solar fury upon the unsuspecting mortal realm. This celestial stable scramble is our first point of potential delay for the whole cosmic shebang. A mainstream historical fact is that the Greeks, like many ancient cultures, personified natural forces, and the sun's daily journey was often envisioned as a divine being driving a chariot. This imagery helped explain the seemingly magical movement of the sun across the sky. Now, if one of the hooray misplaces a crucial rein, or if young Hebe, the cupbearer, is late with the steed's morning appetizer of pure, unadulterated flame, Apollo's departure gets pushed back, and if Apollo is late, the whole schedule of the Olympian day is thrown into disarray. Imagine Zeus tapping his foot impatiently, waiting for the official daylight to start so he can get on with his important business of, ruling the cosmos and perhaps chasing a few nymphs. Other minor deities, like Eos Dawn, who has her own chariot and is meant to be the opening act, might find herself lingering awkwardly in the eastern sky, her rosy fingers getting a bit chilly, waiting for the main event. Is he coming, or what might do is starting to freeze? Then there's the celestial equivalent of merging onto the highway. Apollo's chariot is big, bright, and very, very hot. He can't just pop out of a side street. The gates of the east have to be opened with due ceremony by the hooray. If they're having a slow morning, or if there's some other divine procession, perhaps Nyx Night is taking her sweet time vacating the sky with her starry entourage, then Apollo is essentially queued up, drumming his divine fingers on the chariot rail. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks envisioned a literal physical path for the sun chariot, or if it was a more metaphorical journey through abstract celestial spheres. But if we're imagining traffic, a literal path with potential for congestion is much more entertaining. You can almost hear Apollo muttering, "Come on, Nix. Some of us have a universe to illuminate. Your stars are lovely, but they're blocking my exit ramp." A quirky or fringe tidbit might involve the other, lesser-known celestial beings who also have morning routines. Perhaps Hemeride is trying to get her own, less flashy, daylight operation underway, or the Anemoi the winds are arguing about whose turn it is to clear the air currents for Apollo's passage. Any one of these minor divine squabbles or inefficiencies in the celestial stables could lead to a delayed sunrise. For you, the mortal down below, this just means a longer, colder, slightly more confusing pre-dawn period. Your rooster doesn't know when to crow. Your olive trees are still shrouded in gloom. And you're wondering if maybe, just maybe, Apollo has decided to take a sick day. But no, it's usually just the divine equivalent of trying to find your keys and get out the door when you're already running late. Writ large across the heavens, the celestial stable scramble, with its fiery steeds and flustered hooray, is just the first invisible traffic jam that affects your day, long before you've even had your first sip of that watered-down wine. The celestial stables have finally disgorged their fiery cargo. The gates of the east have creaked open, and with a divine roar that probably rattles the columns of the Parthenon, Apollo's sun chariot bursts forth. This isn't a gentle Nespresso machine kind of sunrise. This is an explosion of pure, unadulterated light and heat hitting a world that was, moments before, swaddled in the cool, dim embrace of Nyx and her starry cloak. And for you, the average ancient Greek going about your morning business, this sudden, brilliant appearance is the cause of our next category of solar-induced delay-blinding sunrise stumbles. Imagine you're a fisherman, mending your nets by the pre-dawn light of a flickering oil lamp on the shores of the Aegean. You're focused on a particularly tricky knot. Suddenly, it's like 1,000 celestial flashbangs have gone off simultaneously just over the eastern horizon. The world is instantly, painfully, overwhelmingly bright. You're completely dazzled, spots dancing before your eyes, your pupils shrinking to pinpricks in a desperate attempt to cope with the onslaught. You drop your net, stumble backwards, and quite possibly trip over a stray amphora or an overly enthusiastic crab. Your productivity for the next 10 minutes, 0. You're too busy blinking and trying to remember what a world with normal levels of illumination looks like. It's the divine equivalent of someone opening the curtains on your hangover. But the curtains are the entire eastern sky, and the hangover is just being alive in ancient Greece. Or perhaps you're a potter, carefully carrying a tray of freshly shaped, still damp clay pots to the drying racks. You're navigating the narrow, uneven alleyways of your village. The sun crests the nearby hills, and the lane is instantly flooded with a light so intense it washes out all the subtle shadows and contours of the path. That loose cobblestone you usually step over invisible, the sleeping dog you normally give a wide berth, a vague, sun-bleached lump. You misjudge your step. Your ankle twists and your precious pots go flying, shattering into a dozen unrecoverable pieces. Your morning's work is ruined, and you're now facing a significant delay in your pottery production schedule. All thanks to Apollo's rather inconsiderate sense of timing and luminosity. Couldn't he dim it down a bit for the first hour? You mutter, nursing your ankle and glaring resentfully at the sky. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Greek daily life was closely tied to the natural cycles of daylight. Work typically began at sunrise and ended at sunset, as artificial lighting was limited and expensive. This makes the quality and timing of that initial sunrise even more critical. If everyone is temporarily blinded or disoriented for the first part of the morning, that's a collective loss of productive time across the entire civilization. Think of the farmers trying to guide their plows, the merchants setting up their stalls in the agora, the sleepy sentries on the city walls trying to distinguish friend from foe in the sudden glare. Everyone is squinting, shading their eyes, and moving with the new, sun-induced caution. This initial burst of light wasn't just an inconvenience. It could be actively disorienting. Historians still argue whether the abruptness of sunrise in certain Mediterranean latitudes, compared to the more gradual dawns of northern climes, influenced aspects of Greek thought or daily routine, perhaps fostering a greater sense of defined beginnings and endings. For our purposes, it definitely fostered a lot of stumbling. You can imagine early morning temple services being disrupted as priests, mid-chant, are suddenly caught in a blinding ray, lose their place in the sacred text, and perhaps accidentally invoke the god of hiccups instead of the intended deity. Whoops! A quirky or fringe tidbit. Some ancient sources, often poetic, describe mortals averting their eyes or even prostrating themselves at the moment of sunrise, not just in reverence, but possibly out of a practical need to avoid being literally dazzled into incompetence. It might have been a commonly accepted sunrise drill, hear the distant celestial neighing. Feel the air warm, brace yourself, and whatever you do, don't look directly at the oncoming divine headlamps. It's like that old advice about not staring at an eclipse. But it happens every single morning. And the eclipse is also your primary source of vitamin D, and the reason your olives grow? The sheer, unmitigated power of Apollo's arrival, while glorious and life-giving, undoubtedly caused a daily ripple of minor accidents, misjudgments, and general fumbling across the land, as an entire populace collectively tried to adjust their vision and their footing in a world suddenly, and very emphatically, lit. This initial solar shockwave is a built-in delay to the start of everyone's day, a brief but universal pause before normal activity can truly commence. So, you've blinked away the spots from your eyes after Apollo's rather aggressive sunrise, and you're finally getting into the swing of your ancient Greek day. The fields are being plowed, albeit with a slight delay from that initial solar glare-induced stumble. The agora is bustling, and philosophers are, well, philosophizing with their usual unhurried dedication. But up in the heavens, Apollo's journey isn't always a smooth, uninterrupted arc of blazing glory. Even divine chariots, especially ones pulled by fire-breathing, ambrosia-fueled supersteeds, can run into mechanical troubles or require the occasional pit stop. And these unscheduled celestial repairs and nectar refueling sessions can cause unexpected solar slowdowns, effectively creating a different kind of traffic jam for the cosmos and a puzzling pause for mortals below. Imagine Apollo is about halfway across the sky, somewhere over the Peloponnese perhaps, when one of his chariot wheels starts making a funny squeaking sound. It's a high-pitched, ethereal squeak, a sound that probably only dogs, particularly sensitive poets, and other gods can hear. But it's enough to annoy Apollo, who, I'd remember, is also the god of music. He can't have a squeaky wheel ruining the harmony of the spheres. Can he? So he has to pull over. Now, where does a sun god pull over? Does he find a conveniently empty cloud? Does he park on the peak of Mount Olympus? Much to the surprise of any gods having a picnic there. Excuse me, Zeus, mind if I just change a tire? Don't worry about the sudden localized heat stroke. This divine pit stop means the sun's apparent motion across the sky might halt, or at least slow down considerably. For you, down on Earth, this would be incredibly disconcerting. One moment the sun is climbing steadily towards its zenith, the next it seems to hover, unmoving for an unnerving length of time. Sundials would cease to function correctly. Shadows would stop their predictable creep. People would look up, confused, wondering if time itself had broken. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient civilizations, including the Greeks, relied heavily on the sun's movement for timekeeping. An unexpected halt or irregularity in its path would have been deeply unsettling and disruptive to their understanding of cosmic order. What kind of repairs might a sun chariot need? Perhaps a celestial axle has overheated from the sheer speed and friction. Maybe one of the fire steeds has thrown a shoe, a golden, probably flaming horseshoe. Or perhaps the reins, woven from strands of sunlight and pure willpower, have started to fray. Apollo might have a divine toolkit, or he might have to summon Hephaestus, the smith god, who is probably up to his elbows in some other fiery project and will grumble extensively about being called out for celestial roadside assistance. Honestly, Apollo, you drive this thing like a maniac regular maintenance. That's the key. Did you at least check the nectar levels before you left? This cosmic Hele call-out all takes time, during which the sun remains stubbornly parked. Then there's refueling, Those fire-breathing steeds don't run on air. They require a steady diet of ambrosia, nectar, or perhaps some specially distilled solar flares. If their energy levels dip, Apollo would need to find a celestial service station. Maybe there are hidden caches of divine fuel dotted across the sky, maintained by lesser deities. Or perhaps Iris, the rainbow messenger goddess, is tasked with delivering emergency nectar top-ups. This process, rounding up the steeds, administering the high-octane fuel, maybe giving them a quick rub-down with a cloud, all contributes to the sun's unscheduled pause. Historians still argue whether myths depicting gods consuming ambrosia and nectar were purely symbolic of their immortality, or if they reflected a more literal belief in divine beings requiring sustenance, albeit of a superior kind. If Apollo's horses need snacks, it certainly adds a layer of mundane reality to his divine duties. A quirky or fringe tidbit could involve what happens to the bits that fall off during these repairs. Imagine a celestial bolt or a fleck of solidified sunlight dropping to Earth. It might be found by a shepherd, who declares it a holy relic, or it might land in someone's olive grove, causing a minor localized conflagration. Honey, did you leave the divine toolkit out again? There's a smoking crater next to the prize-winning zucchini. These divine pit stops, while perhaps rare, would have been profoundly baffling for mortals. The sun, the very symbol of regularity and predictability, behaving erratically, it would spark rumors, prophecies of doom, or perhaps just a lot of confused head-scratching and a general downing of tools until the sun decided to get a move on. This celestial breakdown service ensures that even the gods aren't immune to the frustrations of an unscheduled stop, creating a solar slowdown that leaves the whole world waiting and wondering. Apollo's sun chariot is back on track, the squeaky wheel now divinely silenced perhaps with a well-aimed thunderbolt from a helpful, if slightly overzealous, Zeus. The sun continues its majestic, if occasionally tardy, journey across the heavens. But even when Apollo himself is driving impeccably, the legacy of past celestial motoring mishaps can continue to cause delays and disruptions for you. The humble ancient Greek, on the ground. The most infamous of these incidents, of course, was the disastrous joyride of Apollo's son, Phaethon, and the scorched landscapes and atmospheric chaos he left in his wake still force earthly travelers onto much longer, more inconvenient routes. You remember the story, or at least the cautionary tale whispered by your grandmother, young Phaethon, eager to prove his divine parentage. Begged Apollo to let him drive the sun chariot for a day. Apollo, in a moment of regrettable parental indulgence, or perhaps just wanting a day off. Even sun gods need a break. Right. Reluctantly agreed. It was, to put it mildly, a catastrophe. The boy couldn't control the fiery steeds. They veered wildly off course, flying too low and scorching vast swathes of the earth, burning forests, drying up rivers, and turning fertile plains into barren deserts. Then they soared too high, causing parts of the world to freeze. A mainstream historical fact is that the myth of Phaethon was a popular one in ancient Greece and Rome, often interpreted as a cautionary tale about hubris and the dangers of exceeding one's capabilities. It also served as an ideological myth, explaining the existence of deserts like the Sahara or the different complexions of peoples in various parts of the world. The immediate aftermath was, of course, apocalyptic. Zeus had to intervene with a strategically aimed thunderbolt to stop Phaethon before he incinerated the entire planet, sending the unfortunate boy tumbling into the Eridanus River. But the long-term consequences, for the purposes of our traffic discussion, are the lasting changes to the landscape. That fertile valley where your ancestors used to graze their flocks. Now it's a parched wasteland, thanks to Phaethon's low-flying antics. The direct trade route that once connected your village to the coast, it now passes through a region so desolate and sun-baked that it's virtually impassable for heavily laden wagons or delicate livestock. So, you're forced to take a lengthy detour, perhaps adding days or even weeks to your journey, all because a demigod teenager couldn't handle his dad's overpowered celestial sports car. It's like a permanent road closure due to a particularly epic multi-vehicle pileup. But the vehicles were divine and the pileup reshaped continents. These Phaethon memorial detours would be a constant source of frustration, Imagine you're a merchant, trying to get your amphory of wine to a distant market. You consult your old family route map, passed down from your great-grandfather. Ah, yes, you say. We just cut through the Libyan plains here. Your guide coughs nervously. About that, sir. Great-grandfather's map might be a trifle optimistic. That area is now what we affectionately call the scorched earth zone. Hi. Lovely for lizard watching. Not so great for wine transport. We'll need to go round via Crete. Should only add a month or two. You can almost hear the collective groan of generations of travelers forced onto these longer, less convenient paths. Historians still argue whether specific geographical features or unusual climatic zones known to the ancient Greeks were directly attributed to Phaethon's ride in popular belief, or if the myth was a more general explanation for extreme environments. Regardless of the precise locations, the idea of a divinely scarred landscape would have been potent. It adds a layer of mythological justification to why some journeys are just inexplicably, miserably long and difficult. Why is this desert so awful? Oh, right. Phaethon. Thanks, kid. A quirky or fringe tidbit, there were likely local legends and place names that referenced the myth. Perhaps a particularly blackened mountain peak was known as Phaethon's Fender, or a dried-up riverbed was called the Chariot's Skid Mark. These would serve as constant, irritating reminders of that one really bad day in celestial motoring history. You might even see enterprising locals selling genuine Phaethon-scorched pebbles to gullible tourists if ancient Greece had tourists in that sense. Guaranteed to be 10% more tragic than your average pebble. The fallout from Phaethon's joyride isn't just a dramatic myth. It's an ongoing, baked-in delay, a permanent alteration to the road network of the ancient world, forcing you and your fellow travelers onto the scenic, but significantly less efficient, routes for generations to come. All because someone didn't check their kid's celestial learner's permit. Even when the chariot is in perfect working order and the path ahead hasn't been permanently barbecued by a previous errant driver, Apollo himself can be the source of some rather unpredictable solar swerves and celestial slowdowns. He is, after all, not just the sun god. He's also the god of music, poetry, prophecy, archery, and a few other demanding portfolios. With so much on his divine mind, it's hardly surprising that he might occasionally get distracted while at the reins of his blazing, 4-horse-powered vehicle. And Apollo's distracted driving drifts can cause all sorts of confusion and delays for you, the poor mortal trying to live a regular life down below. Imagine Apollo is cruising along his celestial highway, the sunbeams streaming, the cosmic winds in his golden hair. Suddenly, a new melody pops into his head, a catchy little tune perfect for the lyre. He starts humming it, tapping out the rhythm on the chariot rail, perhaps even jotting down a few divine notes on a handy papyrus scroll he keeps for such inspirations. Don't text and drive. Apollo. While he's lost in his musical composition, his grip on the reins might loosen, and those fiery steeds, sensing a lack of firm direction, might start to wander a bit. The chariot veers slightly off its prescribed course, down on Earth. This could manifest as the sun appearing to dip unexpectedly, or to track a little too far north or south for that time of day. Your sundial is suddenly telling you it's an hour later than it feels, or your carefully planted crops are getting an unusual angle of sunlight, causing your prize-winning cucumbers to wilt in protest. Honestly, you grumble. Can't he compose his symphonies on his own time? Some of us are trying to grow cucumbers that don't look like sad, sunburnt pickles. Or perhaps he's preoccupied with a prophecy. As the god of the oracle at Delphi, Apollo is privy to all sorts of future events, foreknowledge that probably weighs heavily on his divine mind. He might be mulling over a particularly ambiguous pronouncement he needs to deliver, or worrying about some impending doom he's foreseen. If only Oedipus had just taken that left turn at Thebes instead of the right, he might be thinking, shaking his head sadly. While deep in prophetic thought, his attention wavers, and whoops! The chariot takes a little wobble. For mortals, this could translate into a day where the light seems strangely fickle, dimming and brightening unpredictably, or where shadows behave erratically, making detailed work a frustrating exercise in chasing the light. It's like trying to read a book when someone keeps fiddling with the dimmer switch. But the dimmer switch is a god having an existential crisis. A mainstream historical fact is that Apollo was one of the most complex and multifaceted deities in the Greek pantheon, with numerous, sometimes seemingly contradictory, attributes and responsibilities. This complexity meant he was involved in many different aspects of human and divine life, giving him plenty of opportunities to be, shall we say, divinely sidetracked. His attention wasn't solely on the mechanics of sun driving. Then there are the more romantic distractions. Apollo, like many Greek gods, had a rather active social life. He might spot a particularly captivating nymph bathing in a secluded stream, or hear the enchanting song of a mortal maiden that piques his interest. Being a god of certain artistic temperaments, he might feel compelled to slow down for a better look, or even make a slight, unannounced detour for a brief celestial chat-up line. Did it hurt? He might call down, "When you fell from heaven." Oh wait, that's my cousin Zeus's line. Still, nice singing. While Apollo is momentarily otherwise engaged, the sun chariot might linger a little too long in one part of the sky, leading to an unusually prolonged morning in one region and a delayed afternoon in another. Farmers in the east are getting an extra hour of daylight they didn't ask for, while those in the west are starting to wonder if noon is ever going to arrive. Historians still argue whether the myths depicting the gods' very human-like flaws and distractions were meant to make them more relatable, to serve as allegories for human behavior, or if they were simply entertaining stories. Whatever the intent, an easily distracted sun god makes for some interesting, if inconvenient, solar phenomena. A quirky or fringe tidbit, there could have been folk beliefs attributing unusual weather patterns or unseasonal light to Apollo's mood. A gloomy, overcast day. Apollo must be sulking after Daphne turned into a tree again. A sudden, intense burst of sunlight. He's clearly showing off for one of his new crushes. It's a very personal form of meteorology. These divine drifts and distractions, born of Apollo's many passions and responsibilities, mean that the sun's journey isn't always the clockwork precision you might hope for. It's more like a scenic drive taken by an easily sidetracked artist, with the whole world subject to his celestial whims and occasional lapses in attention, leading to yet another set of unpredictable delays in your day. While Apollo is up there, occasionally taking the scenic route with his sun chariot, another aspect of his divine portfolio is causing a very different, very terrestrial kind of traffic jam down on Earth. As the god of prophecy, Apollo is the divine patron of the oracle at Delphi, the most famous and influential oracle in the ancient Greek world, and the sheer number of people flocking to Delphi to consult his priestess, the Pythia, could create significant congestion on the roads leading to this sacred site. An indirect but very real consequence of Apollo's presence and power. Imagine you're a merchant trying to transport your wares along the roads of Phocis, the region where Delphi is located. Or perhaps you're a simple traveler on your way to visit relatives in a nearby town. As you get closer to the sacred precinct, you notice the roads becoming increasingly crowded. You're no longer just sharing the path with local farmers and their donkeys. Now you're surrounded by a diverse throng, anxious kings and city envoys in chariots, wealthy aristocrats on horseback with their entourages, humble pilgrims on foot, nervous individuals hoping for guidance on personal matters, and probably a healthy number of hucksters, souvenir sellers, and fast food vendors or their ancient equivalents, selling roasted chickpeas and questionable wine catering to the influx. A mainstream historical fact is that the Oracle of Delphi was immensely important for centuries. Consulted by both Greeks and non-Greeks on matters ranging from warfare and colonization to personal decisions like marriage or business ventures, this popularity naturally led to a high volume of visitors. This influx of hopefuls, all converging on a relatively remote mountainous location, would inevitably lead to what we might call Oracle Rush Hour. The narrow, winding mountain roads leading up to Delphi weren't designed for heavy traffic. Wagons laden with offerings for the god, or carrying supplies for the temple staff and the town that grew up around it, would struggle on the steep inclines, potentially causing long tailbacks. Wealthy petitioners in their chariots might demand right-of-way, leading to arguments and standoffs with slower-moving pedestrians or pack animals. It's like trying to get to a major music festival, but the festival is in a hard-to-reach holy site, and the headline act is a priestess inhaling volcanic fumes and spouting cryptic pronouncements. Good luck finding parking. The delays wouldn't just be on the roads themselves. Once you reached Delphi, there was the queue to actually consult the oracle. This wasn't a quick in and out affair. There were purification rituals to undergo, expensive preliminary sacrifices to make the temple priests weren't running a charity, you know, and then the anxious wait for your turn to pose your question to the Pythia. Depending on the urgency of your query and your social standing, kings and official state delegations often got preferential treatment. Naturally, you might be waiting for days, even weeks, camped out in or around Delphi. The town would have been constantly overflowing with these temporary residents, straining its resources, food, water, lodging, and creating a perpetually bustling, noisy, and somewhat stressed atmosphere. Historians still argue about the exact procedures and scheduling for consultations at Delphi. Some sources suggest the Pythia only prophesied on certain days of the month, which would have concentrated the demand and exacerbated the waiting times. Imagine traveling for weeks to get there, only to find out you've arrived on an off day and have to wait another fortnight, all while your supplies dwindle and your lodging costs mount. Oh, the Pythia is only divinely inspired on the seventh day of the waxing moon, and only if the omens from the sacrificed goat's liver are favorable. Of course, why wouldn't it be that simple? A quirky or fringe tidbit, the area around Delphi was also home to the Pythian Games, one of the four great Panhellenic games, held every 4 years in Apollo's honor. During the games, the influx of athletes, spectators, merchants, and dignitaries would have been colossal, turning the entire region into a massive temporary city and creating traffic jams of truly epic proportions. If your journey happened to coincide with the Pythian Games and you weren't actually going to them, you'd probably just give up and find a quiet cave to hibernate in until it was all over. The sacred way leading up to the temple precinct was lined with treasuries built by various Greek city-states to house their dedications to Apollo, a sort of divine avenue of embassies. You can imagine diplomatic golf carts, or their ancient equivalent, getting stuck behind slow-moving sacrificial processions on this very important road. So, while Apollo himself is blazing a trail across the sky, his earthly headquarters at Delphi is a hotspot of human congestion, a divinely sanctioned bottleneck where the desperate desire for prophetic guidance creates very mundane, very frustrating traffic delays for anyone unlucky enough to be traveling in the vicinity. Apollo is diligently or perhaps still a bit distractedly steering his sun chariot across the vast expanse of the heavens. The light is, for the moment, steady, and the detours caused by past joyrides or current oracle seekers are localized problems. But there's another, more unpredictable source of solar disruption that can cast a gloom over your ancient Greek day and cause a different kind of slowdown divine interference. Often in the form of Hera's jealous cloud cover, or similar atmospheric roadblocks created by other meddling deities. When the gods are displeased or simply feeling mischievous, your sunny afternoon can turn into a murky twilight with very little warning. Imagine you're a sculptor, working in your open-air courtyard on a magnificent marble statue of, ironically, Apollo himself. The light is perfect, allowing you to see every subtle curve and plane of the stone. You're just about to carve the perfect, enigmatic smile onto his divine lips. Suddenly, a vast, dark cloud bank rolls in from nowhere, seemingly conjured out of a perfectly clear blue sky. The sunlight is snuffed out, plunging your workspace into an unhelpful gloom. You can barely see your chisel, let alone the delicate details of the god's face. Work grinds to a halt. You peer up at the sky, muttering, "Hera's at it again. Is she—" This is the celestial equivalent of a sudden power outage, but the power company is run by a committee of squabbling, emotionally volatile immortals. Hera, queen of the gods and Zeus's long-suffering wife, was particularly notorious for her jealousy and her vindictive schemes, often targeting Zeus's various mortal paramours or their offspring. A mainstream historical fact is that Hera's character in Greek mythology is complex. She's a powerful goddess of marriage and queenly authority, but also frequently portrayed as vengeful and prone to fits of rage, especially concerning Zeus's infidelities. If Apollo, one of Zeus's many accomplished and therefore irritatingly successful children by another mother Leto, in this case, was having a particularly glorious day, or if one of his favorite heroes on Earth was about to achieve a great triumph, thanks to a conveniently sunny battlefield. Hera might just decide to throw a celestial wet blanket over the proceedings. She could summon the Nephilim cloud nymphs to create an unnaturally thick and persistent cloud layer, blocking Apollo's rays and generally making life miserable for everyone below. It's divine passive aggression on a meteorological scale. This isn't just a bit of light cloud cover making things pleasantly shady. This is a sudden, unseasonal, and often localized dimming that disrupts normal activity. Farmers might worry about their crops not getting enough sunlight. Sailors, navigating by the sun's position, could find themselves disoriented if it suddenly vanishes behind an impenetrable bank of divine smog. Religious festivals held in Apollo's honor, which naturally require bright sunshine for maximum effect, might be ruined, much to the annoyance of his priests and worshippers. We've got 100 sacrificed oxen ready for the sun blessing ritual, and now it looks like Hades is having a barbecue up there. Other gods might get in on the act too. Poseidon, if he's in a tiff with his nephew Apollo, could cause sea mists and fogs to roll inland, obscuring the sun for coastal communities. Ilis, keeper of the winds, if bribed or angered, could whip up dust storms that fill the air with choking grit and blot out the daylight. Even Zeus himself, if he wanted to send a message or create a particularly dramatic atmosphere for one of his earthly interventions, might orchestrate a sudden, unholy gloom. Historians still argue whether these mythological accounts of gods manipulating weather were purely symbolic representations of natural phenomena, or if they reflected a belief system where every unexpected shower or persistent fog was seen as a direct, intentional act by a specific deity. When your weather forecast depends on the mood swings of the Olympian family, planning your week becomes a bit tricky. A quirky or fringe tidbit. Some myths tell of heroes or sorceresses who could temporarily capture or bind the sun or moon, usually through powerful magic or by tricking the celestial charioteer. While Apollo is unlikely to be easily fooled, the idea that the sun's journey could be supernaturally interfered with would add another layer of uncertainty to your day. Imagine some upstart Thessalian witch bragging she's put a little hex on Apollo's horses just to see what happens. The resulting flickering daylight would be enough to give anyone a headache and bring detailed work to a standstill. Whether it's Hera's divine sulk, Poseidon's misty moods, or some other celestial meddling, these artificially induced periods of dimness and obscurity act as atmospheric roadblocks, slowing down mortal activity, disrupting schedules, and generally reminding you that in ancient Greece, even a sunny day wasn't guaranteed if a god woke up on the wrong side of Mount Olympus. The divinely manufactured clouds have parted. Perhaps Hera found a new, more deserving target for her meteorological ire, and Apollo's sun chariot once again blazes in a clear sky. He's making good time now, the fiery steeds galloping with gusto. But the celestial highway isn't an empty void. It's surprisingly cluttered. And just like terrestrial roads, the skyways have their own obstacles and slow-moving traffic that Apollo must carefully navigate, leading to what we might call constellation navigation nightmares and further celestial slowdowns. Think about it, the sky is full of constellations. These aren't just pretty patterns of distant stars. In Greek mythology, many constellations represent heroes, monsters, and animals placed in the heavens by the gods themselves. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Greeks, and like many cultures, meticulously observed the stars and grouped them into constellations, which were then woven into their mythology and used for navigation, agriculture, and timekeeping. Now, imagine these constellations not as fixed, distant points, but as actual semi-corporeal entities, or at least as designated celestial zones with their own right-of-way. Apollo can't just plow through Draco the Dragon or sideswipe Orion the Hunter. That would be rude and possibly start an interconstellational incident. Excuse me, Apollo, but your left rear solar flare just singed the tip of Taurus's horn. Do you have celestial insurance for that? So, Apollo has to steer his chariot with considerable skill, weaving his way through this stellar obstacle course. Some constellations might be particularly large or awkwardly placed, forcing him to take a slight detour or slow his pace to avoid a collision. Perhaps Ursa Major, the Great Bear, is having a slow, ambling sort of day, taking up a significant portion of the northern sky lane. Apollo, eager to get to the western horizon on schedule, might find himself stuck behind her, fuming impatiently, much like a sports car driver stuck behind a slow-moving tractor on a country lane. Honestly, Callisto, he might mutter, Ursa Major being the nymph Callisto in a starrier, furrier form. Some of us have a tight solar schedule to keep. Can't you amble a bit faster, or at least pull over into a conveniently empty patch of intergalactic dust? Then there are the planets, the wandering stars, as the Greeks called them. These celestial bodies, also often associated with specific gods like Hermes, Mercury, or Aphrodite Venus, had their own orbits and apparent movements across the sky. While their paths were generally predictable, their conjunctions with each other or with certain constellations could create temporary celestial choke points that Apollo would need to navigate carefully. Imagine Mars, the fiery planet, having a close encounter with the Pleiades star cluster. Apollo might need to give that whole area a wide berth to avoid any divine road rage or accidental planetary nudges. And what about other, less predictable, celestial traffic comets? Those hairy stars would occasionally blaze across the sky, unannounced and often seen as omens. A comet suddenly streaking across Apollo's path would certainly require some quick, evasive maneuvers. Meteors or shooting stars could be like celestial pebbles flicking up from the cosmic roadway. While probably not a major threat to the sun chariot, they could be momentarily distracting. Historians still argue about how ancient cultures interpreted such transient celestial phenomena as divine messages, portents of doom, or simply as natural, if unusual, occurrences. For Apollo, they might just be another unexpected hazard on his daily drive. A quirky or fringe tidbit, some mythic traditions from various cultures describe battles or conflicts between celestial beings, or imagine the stars themselves as sentient entities with their own relationships and rivalries. While Greek myths don't typically depict Apollo fighting with, say, the constellation Gemini, the idea of the sky as a populated, dynamic space rather than a static backdrop adds to the potential for unforeseen encounters and navigational challenges. Perhaps the Hydra constellation is feeling particularly sprawling today, its many heads weaving across Apollo's preferred trajectory. Or maybe the Milky Way, that great river of stars, is experiencing unusually heavy ethereal barge traffic. The point is, the sky isn't empty. It's a complex three-dimensional environment filled with significant stellar and planetary bodies, each with its own mythological significance and, in our anachronistic traffic analogy, its own road presence. Apollo, for all his divine power, can't just ignore these celestial landmarks. He has to chart a course through them, respecting their boundaries and avoiding any untoward cosmic collisions. This meticulous navigation, this constant awareness of the other inhabitants of the celestial sphere, naturally imposes a certain caution and deliberation on his journey, preventing him from simply taking the most direct, unimpeded route. It's another layer of inherent delay, another reason why the sun's daily journey is more of a careful celestial ballet than a straightforward sprint. Apollo has successfully navigated the star-studded obstacle course of the high heavens, perhaps only mildly irritated by a slow-moving Ursa Minor or a particularly flamboyant comet demanding the right-of-way. His journey continues, but the path of the sun chariot isn't a fixed, immutable line drawn across the sky day after day. It changes with the seasons. And these seasonal route adjustments, particularly around the solstices, mean Apollo takes longer, less direct paths at certain times of the year, directly impacting your daylight hours and, consequently, your daily mortal schedules down on Earth. This is the solstice slow route shuffle, a predictable yet significant factor in Apollo's heavenly traffic patterns. You, as an ancient Greek farmer, are acutely aware of the changing seasons. Your entire livelihood depends on them. You know that in summer the days are long and hot, giving you many hours of daylight to tend your fields. In winter, the days are short and cold, and darkness descends much earlier. A mainstream historical fact is that the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year, and equinoxes were key markers in the ancient agricultural calendar, and were often imbued with religious significance. The Greeks, like other ancient peoples, observed these celestial events closely and understood their connection to the sun's apparent path. In mythological terms, this means that Apollo's chariot doesn't always take the same celestial superhighway. Around the summer solstice, typically late June, he takes a high, wide arc across the sky, his northernmost route. This gives you those gloriously long summer days. He's essentially taking the scenic route, maximizing his time above the horizon for the northern hemisphere. But this wider, higher path, while providing more daylight, might also be considered a slower journey in terms of its perceived daily completion from a fixed earthly perspective. He has more celestial ground to cover before he dips below the western horizon. It's like choosing the longer, prettier country road instead of the direct, boring motorway. Great for sightseeing, but it takes more time. Conversely, around the winter solstice, typically late December, Apollo seems to hug the southern horizon, taking a much lower, shorter arc across the sky. This results in those brief, often gloomy winter days where the sun barely seems to climb above the treetops before it starts to descend again. He's on his express route in terms of the arc's length, but because it's so short and low, your usable daylight is drastically reduced. It's like he's cutting corners, trying to get his daily drive over with as quickly as possible so he can go back to Olympus and warm his divine toes by Hephaestus's forge. Is that it? Apollos, you might grumble, lighting your oil lamps at what feels like mid-afternoon. Phoning it in a bit today, aren't we? These seasonal shifts in Apollo's route, and thus in the length of daylight, directly impact your daily routines and productivity. In summer, you can work in the fields from early dawn till late dusk, but in winter, your outdoor working hours are severely curtailed. This forced slowdown in winter affects everything from agriculture to construction to travel. Journeys that might take 3 days in summer could take 5 in winter, simply because there are fewer daylight hours for safe travel. Merchants might delay starting long voyages until the days grow longer. Battles, if they had to be fought, were often timed to take advantage of maximum daylight, or avoided altogether in the dead of winter. Historians still argue about the precise astronomical knowledge possessed by ordinary people in ancient Greece, versus that of specialist priests or astronomers. While learned individuals certainly understood the mechanics of solstices and equinoxes, for the average farmer, it was likely more an empirical understanding the sun behaves differently at different times of the year, and we adjust our lives accordingly. A quirky or fringe tidbit could be the folk beliefs or rituals associated with encouraging the sun to return after the winter solstice, when the days are at their shortest and coldest. Many cultures have winter festivals like the Roman Saturnalia, which has echoes in later Christmas traditions that involve lights, fires, and feasting, perhaps in part a sympathetic magic to call back the sun's warmth and longer days. You might leave out a small offering of honey cakes for Apollo's weary steeds, hoping to bribe them into taking a slightly more northerly, day-lengthening route tomorrow. Come on, Pyrrhus, old boy. Just a little higher in the sky. There's an extra sweet honey cake in it for you. So, Apollo's seasonal commute isn't just a matter of celestial mechanics. It's a fundamental driver of your life's rhythm. His long summer detours give you ample time for work and play, while his winter shortcuts plunge you into early twilight and a period of enforced inactivity. This solstice slow route shuffle, while predictable and cyclical, is a constant reminder that your schedule is ultimately dictated by the sun god's grand, seasonally adjusted itinerary. Another way his heavenly journey imposes its timetable on your earthly existence. Apollo is dutifully making his way across the sky, perhaps on his long summer arc, giving you plenty of daylight. The constellations are behaving. No one is throwing clouds in his path, and his chariot is running smoothly. But Apollo, being a god with a wide range of interests and a soft spot for certain mortals, especially talented or good-looking ones, is prone to another kind of unscheduled stop that can wreak havoc with both celestial and earthly traffic patterns, the heroic rescue roadblock. When one of his favorite heroes is in a dire predicament down on Earth, Apollo might just slam on the celestial brakes, make an unannounced landing, or otherwise intervene, causing a significant disruption to his solar schedule. Picture this. You're a shepherd, peacefully watching your flock on a mountainside. The sun is high and hot. Suddenly, wasn't you see the sun chariot itself, that blazing golden conveyance, begin to descend rapidly? It lands presumably with a fair bit of localized ground shaking and terrified bleating from your sheep in a nearby valley. What on earth, or rather, what in the heavens, is going on? Chances are Apollo has spotted one of his pet heroes in a bit of a pickle. Perhaps young Hyacinthus. His handsome Spartan friend is about to be beamed by a rogue discus thrown by a jealous Zephyrus, the west wind. Or maybe one of his priestesses is being harassed by some uncouth satyrs. Apollo, being the proactive, interventionist deity that he is, can't just let this stand. He has to pop down and sort things out. A mainstream historical fact is that Greek gods frequently intervened directly in mortal affairs, aiding their favorites, punishing their enemies, and generally meddling in ways that drove much of the plot of Greek mythology. Apollo was no exception, often playing a key role in the stories of heroes like Achilles or Orestes, while Apollo is busy smiting uncouth satyrs, deflecting rogue discusses, or perhaps just offering some timely divine advice. Pro tip: Achilles, watch out for your heel. The sun chariot is parked, idling, as it were, on some remote Greek hillside. This means the sun's apparent journey across the sky comes to a dead halt. For you, the shepherd, it's a terrifyingly awesome spectacle. For everyone else in ancient Greece, it's another baffling solar anomaly. Why has it been noon for the last 3 hours? People would be asking, did someone break the sky again? Sundials are useless, shadows are frozen, and the natural rhythm of the day is thrown completely out of whack. It's like a divine VIP motorcade has decided to stop traffic on the main celestial highway for an unscheduled photo opportunity with a local hero. These heroic rescue missions, while noble from the hero's perspective, would be a nightmare for cosmic timekeeping. Apollo might get caught up in the moment. A quick rescue could turn into a lengthy chat, some impromptu lyre playing, or even a small, divinely catered picnic. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is stuck in perpetual high noon, or an unnervingly extended afternoon. Historians still argue about the theological implications of such divine interventions. Did they represent a belief in a cosmos where gods could override natural laws at will? Or were these stories more allegorical, exploring themes of fate, divine favor, and human agency? From a purely traffic management perspective, they're a disaster. A quirky or fringe tidbit: imagine the confusion for other celestial bodies. Selene, goddess of the moon, who has her own chariot and schedule, might be expecting to take over the sky at a certain time. If Apollo is still parked on Earth playing hero, Selene is left waiting in the celestial wings. Honestly, Apollo, she might sigh to her moon steeds. He does this every time a pretty boy stubs his toe. Some of us have tides to manage, yet, the ensuing celestial traffic jam, with the moon chariot unable to start its shift, could lead to some very strange nights indeed. Perhaps no moon at all, or a moon appearing at a completely unexpected hour. Once Apollo has concluded his heroic intervention and reluctantly returns to his sun chariot, he then has a problem. He's behind schedule. Does he try to make up for lost time by driving extra fast, potentially scorching the earth a bit in his haste shades of Phaethon, but hopefully with more skill? Or does he just arrive late at the western horizon, leading to an unusually long day and a delayed sunset? Either way, his unscheduled stop to play superhero has a ripple effect, disrupting the natural order and causing a significant, if temporary, roadblock in the smooth passage of time. Your meticulously planned afternoon of olive pressing or philosophical debate is now subject to the whims of heroic narratives and Apollo's soft heart for a hero in distress. Apollo's heroic intervention is complete. The grateful and probably slightly singed hero is saved, and the sun chariot is back on its celestial path, albeit a bit behind schedule. Now, Apollo might be tempted to put his divine foot down, urging his fiery steeds to pick up the pace. But even the mighty sun god can encounter slower-moving traffic on the celestial highways, and one of the most prominent, and perhaps frustrating for him, is his own sister, Selene, in her more leisurely lunar vehicle. Overtaking Selene's slow moon, or other, less zippy, celestial bodies, could often lead to Apollo getting stuck in what amounts to a divine tailback. Selene, the goddess of the moon, also drives a chariot across the sky, typically drawn by 2 white horses or oxen, significantly less horsepower than Apollo's 4 fire-breathing solar steeds. Her journey is associated with the night, providing a gentler, silvery light. A mainstream historical fact is that both the sun and moon were personified as deities driving chariots in Greek mythology, representing the fundamental celestial cycles that governed life. Apollo, often identified with Helios and Selene, were sibling deities, children of the Titans Hyperion and Theia, embodying this solar and lunar duality. Now, the transition between day and night, sun and moon, isn't always a perfectly choreographed handover. Sometimes, particularly around the full moon, you can see the moon in the sky even before the sun has fully set, or lingering in the morning sky after sunrise. In our traffic analogy, this is where things get tricky. Imagine Apollo, trying to make his grand exit in the west, finds his path partially obstructed by Selene, who is perhaps just beginning her ascent or is taking a particularly wide, scenic arc with her slower-moving chariot. "Come on, sis." Apollo might grumble, reining in his impatient fire steeds. "Some of us are trying to end the day here. You're hogging the western horizon." Ha! He can't just blast past her. That would be unbrotherly, and might cause a celestial collision that would shower the earth with undesirable divine debris. So he has to slow down, wait for an opening, or take a slightly less direct route to the gates of the west. This celestial passing lane issue could be particularly pronounced if Selene is, for some reason, delayed herself. Perhaps her moon oxen are feeling a bit sluggish, or she's been distracted by her own mortal love interest, the handsome shepherd Endymion, whom she often visited while he slept. If Selene is running late for her nightly duties, she might still be puttering about the sky when Apollo is eager to finish his shift. The resulting slowdown for Apollo means the sunset is delayed. The twilight lingers unnaturally, and everyone on Earth is wondering why the day is dragging on for so long. "Is it just me?" you might say to your neighbor over the garden wall. "Or is Apollo having trouble finding a parking spot tonight?" Historians still argue about the precise relationship and hierarchy between solar and lunar deities in various periods of Greek belief. While Apollo Helios, as the sun god, often seems more dynamic and powerful, Selene held significant sway as the goddess of the moon, influencing everything from tides, though the Greeks didn't fully understand this mechanism, to female cycles and even madness, hence lunacy. Her passage was just as important, if generally less flamboyant, than her brothers. A quirky or fringe tidbit, there might have been myths or folk beliefs about what happens when the sun and moon chariots get too close. Perhaps it caused unusual atmospheric phenomena, like strange halos around the sun or moon, or unseasonal weather. Or maybe it was believed that if their paths crossed too directly, it could lead to eclipses, which were often seen as powerful and sometimes terrifying omens. An eclipse, like in this traffic model, could be seen as a major celestial pileup, or at least a very serious instance of one divine vehicle completely obscuring another. The priests and soothsayers would have a field day interpreting that one. Apollo and Selene are having a celestial fender bender. This clearly means the price of olives will plummet, and someone important will trip over a goat. So, even without any mechanical failures or divine distractions on his own part, Apollo's speed and efficiency are sometimes dictated by the other, slower-moving traffic in the sky, his need to navigate around his more sedate sister. Selene, or other celestial phenomena that might be in the way, adds another layer of potential delay to his daily journey. A reminder that even for the sun god, the heavens aren't always an open road. He, too, sometimes has to drum his divine fingers on the chariot rail, waiting for the vehicle in front to kindly get a move on. Apollo, having successfully navigated around his sister Selena's nocturnal entourage, perhaps with a cheerful wave or a slightly impatient celestial sigh, now urges his fiery steeds towards the zenith, the highest point of his daily arc. As he reaches this midday peak, the sun chariot blazes directly overhead, unleashing its most intense concentrated power upon the world below. And this incredible, unfiltered solar radiation leads to a very specific, very widespread form of delay. For you and your fellow ancient Greeks, the midday heatwave halts. The sheer intensity of the noonday sun often forced a cessation of most strenuous outdoor activity, leading to a culturally ingrained period of rest or siesta. Imagine you're a farmer, toiling in your vineyard under the Attic sun. It's approaching midday. The air, which was pleasantly warm in the morning, now shimmers with heat. The cicadas are buzzing in a deafening, heat-drunk chorus. Sweat is pouring down your face, and the back of your neck feels like it's being personally roasted by Apollo's exhaust fumes. Your tools feel hot to the touch, and the earth itself radiates warmth. Continuing to work under these conditions isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous, risking heat stroke or severe sunburn. A mainstream historical fact is that in Mediterranean climates, the midday heat, especially during summer, can be extreme. And agricultural work, as well as other outdoor labor, was often structured around it, with an early start, a long break during the hottest part of the day, and a return to work in the cooler, late afternoon. So, what do? You stop, you seek shade under an olive tree, in the cool interior of your stone farmhouse, or perhaps in a local taverna if you can call a small, shaded room selling watered wine a taverna. This isn't laziness, it's common sense, a necessary adaptation to the environment dictated by Apollo's overhead presence. The entire rhythm of life slows down. The field's empty. Construction sites fall silent, and even the normally bustling agora might see a lull in activity as merchants and shoppers retreat from the glare. It's a forced pause, a collective societal siesta imposed by the sun god himself. It's as if Apollo is declaring, "Okay, mortals, I'm at peak awesomeness now. You may all take a mandatory break to appreciate my power, and maybe rehydrate. Seriously, drink some water." This midday halt, while sensible, is still a delay in the grand scheme of your productive day. If you have a deadline, perhaps a harvest that needs to be brought in before a predicted storm, or a building project that needs to be completed, these lost hours in the middle of the day can be frustrating. You might try to work a little longer into the heat, but your efficiency plummets, and the risk of making mistakes or injuring yourself increases. The animals also, too, suffer in the intense heat and need to rest in the shade. Your oxen won't plow, your donkeys won't carry, if they're on the verge of heat exhaustion. Historians still argue about the exact social and economic impacts of this siesta culture in ancient societies. Did it hinder overall productivity compared to cooler climates where work could continue uninterrupted through the day? Or did it simply lead to a different, equally effective structuring of the workday, with activity concentrated in the cooler morning and evening hours? Regardless, it was a significant feature of daily life, directly attributable to the sun's power. A quirky or fringe tidbit, there were likely folk beliefs about the dangers of the midday sun beyond just heat stroke. The Greeks, like many cultures, had stories of spirits or demons that were particularly active during the hottest part of the day, when the world seemed strangely still and shadows were at their shortest. The noonday demon was a concept that appeared in various forms, and sensible people might avoid being out and about during this unlucky or spiritually potent hour, adding another reason to seek shelter and pause their activities. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we might have discussed in another context? You'd need something seriously heavy-duty to protect you from Apollo at his zenith, both physically and perhaps spiritually. The Greeks might have used olive oil, but that probably just made you fry faster. So, as Apollo's chariot reigns supreme at its highest point, its fiery breath blanketing the land, a great stillness descends. It's a slowdown imposed not by celestial traffic jams or divine whimsy, but by the sheer, unadulterated power of the sun itself. This midday heatwave halt is a built-in, unavoidable delay in the ancient Greek workday, a time when the wisest course of action is to retreat, rest, and wait for the sun god to move on a bit, taking his most scorching rays with him. Your ambition to finish that row of vines will just have to wait until the air cools and the shadows lengthen once more. The oppressive midday heat has finally begun to wane. Apollo, having passed his zenith, is now steering his sun chariot on its downward arc towards the western horizon. The shadows are lengthening, and a cooler breeze might be stirring. This is your cue, as a diligent ancient Greek, to resume your afternoon activities. But the declining sun also brings a new kind of urgency, a race against the encroaching darkness. And this leads to our next form of solar-induced traffic, the sunset scramble and the twilight tailbacks. As mortals rush to complete their tasks, get home, or secure their property before night fully descends. Imagine you're a merchant in the agora. You had a slow period during the midday heat. But now, as the afternoon wears on, business picks up. People are emerging from their siestas, eager to make their purchases before the market closes. But you're all acutely aware that your window of opportunity is shrinking with every degree Apollo's chariot dips towards the horizon. There's a flurry of activity, last-minute haggling, goods being quickly packed up, accounts being hastily settled. It's like a closing down sale every single evening. You're trying to serve 3 customers at once, while also keeping an eye on your apprentices to make sure they're not slacking off as the light fades. The usual leisurely pace of commerce is replaced by a more frenetic energy. Or perhaps you're a farmer, working to get the last of your olive harvest in. You and your family have been picking olives since the cooler part of the afternoon began, but the baskets aren't quite full yet, and Apollo is making a rather swift exit stage west. You redouble your efforts, hands flying, trying to gather as many precious olives as possible before it becomes too dark to see properly. Dropped olives in the gloom are lost olives. This rush to beat the sunset can lead to mistakes, fatigue, and a general sense of harried pressure. Just one more tree, you shout to your weary son, even as the sky turns a fiery orange and purple. It's the ancient equivalent of trying to finish mowing the lawn before it starts to rain. But the rain is impenetrable, monster-filled darkness. This end-of-day rush isn't just about work. It's also about getting home safely. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient cities could be dangerous places after dark. Street lighting, where it existed at all, was minimal, perhaps a few flickering torches outside wealthy homes or public buildings. Once Apollo's chariot was gone, the streets would be plunged into darkness, making navigation difficult and providing cover for thieves, footpads, or other nocturnal ne'er-do-wells. So, as sunset approaches, there's a general movement of people heading home, a kind of ancient Greek commute. Roads and pathways leading into residential areas or out to surrounding villages would see a surge in foot traffic, donkey traffic, and perhaps the occasional rattling cart, all trying to reach their destinations before true nightfall. This can lead to congestion, especially at city gates, which might be closed and barred at a certain hour after sunset for security reasons. If you're a traveler arriving at a city late in the afternoon, you'll be pushing hard to make it through those gates before they clang shut, leaving you to spend an uncomfortable and potentially unsafe night camped outside the walls. You might find yourself in a twilight tailback of other latecomers, all urging their tired animals forward, a scene of jostling and anxious shouts. "Hold the gate, we're almost there. My olives will spoil if I have to sleep out here with the wolves and the tax collectors." Historians still argue about the extent to which ancient Greek society was truly nocturnal. While some activities, like philosophical symposia or certain religious rites, took place after dark for most ordinary people, the end of daylight largely meant the end of the active day. The sunset scramble was therefore a significant daily punctuation mark. A quirky or fringe tidbit, there were various superstitions associated with twilight, often seen as a liminal time when the veil between worlds was thin, and spirits or mischievous sprites might be abroad. This might add an extra incentive to get indoors quickly, not just for physical safety, but for spiritual peace of mind too. You don't want to be caught out when Hecate, goddess of witchcraft and crossroads, is doing her evening rounds with her ghostly hounds. So, as Apollo dramatically dips his chariot below the western horizon, painting the sky with glorious, fleeting colors, he triggers a flurry of activity on Earth. It's a race against his departure, a daily rush hour fueled by the desire to finish work, reach safety, and prepare for the long hours of darkness until his return. This sunset scramble is the final solar-powered traffic jam of the day, a brief but intense period of hurry before the land settles into the quiet, lamp-lit routines of the night. Apollo has completed his daily drive, the last rays of his chariot fading into a soft, velvety twilight. Selene is now taking her turn, her silvery chariot casting a gentler glow. But what about Apollo's magnificent, fire-breathing steeds? Ethon, Eos, Phlegon, and Pyroeus can't just be unharnessed and turned out into a celestial pasture to graze on stardust. These are high-performance, immortal equines that have just dragged a flaming chariot across the entire sky. They need proper care and, more importantly, refueling. and the process of tending to these divine beasts, particularly refueling them mid-flight if the journey was unusually taxing, or if Apollo was making up for lost time, could create its own set of bizarre atmospheric phenomena and brief, unpredictable pauses or flickers in daylight, causing yet another layer of solar-induced traffic issues. Imagine you're an ancient Greek astronomer, or just a keen-eyed observer of the heavens, meticulously tracking the sun's path. Suddenly, you notice a strange, localized shimmering around the solar disk, or perhaps a brief, inexplicable dimming, followed by a surge of even brighter light, or maybe wisps of what look like golden, incandescent vapor trail behind the sun for a few moments. What you might be witnessing is the celestial equivalent of a mid-air refueling operation, or at least a snack break for some very hungry sun horses. These steeds, as their fiery names suggest, likely consumed something a bit more potent than ordinary hay. Ambrosia, the food of the gods, and nectar, their drink, are the obvious candidates. A mainstream historical fact is that ambrosia and nectar were considered the sustenance of the Greek gods, granting them immortality and superhuman vitality. It stands to reason that their divine animals would also partake of these, or something similarly potent. Now, picture Apollo trying to get his four powerful, probably still very keyed up, horses to hold still in mid-sky while they hooray, or perhaps some dedicated celestial stable nymphs. Try to administer this superfuel. There might be a bit of celestial spillage. A splash of stray nectar could instantly vaporize into a shimmering cloud. A crumb of ambrosia, if it fell towards Earth, might burn up in the atmosphere like a tiny, supercharged meteor, creating a brief, dazzling streak of light. It's like a pit stop at 30,000 feet, but the fuel is divine and the mechanics are probably terrified of getting kicked by a flaming hoof. If the refueling process required the chariot to slow down or momentarily deviate from its course, this would translate into those perplexing flickers or pauses in daylight you observe from Earth. Did the sun just blink? You might ask your equally bewildered neighbor. Or did I have too much of that strong Thracian wine at lunch? These minor irregularities, while perhaps not causing major societal shutdowns like a full-blown divine pit stop for repairs, would still be unsettling. They would disrupt the perceived perfect regularity of the sun, adding to the sense that its journey was a managed and occasionally mismanaged affair. Historians still argue about how literally the ancient Greeks interpreted the more anthropomorphic aspects of their myths. Did they truly envision Apollo's horses needing to eat in a conventional sense? Or was this a metaphorical way of describing the sun's unflagging energy, regardless of the literal belief? The imagery of divine animals requiring sustenance provides a wonderfully relatable, if anachronistic, source for our traffic delays. A quirky or fringe tidbit, some obscure local myths or poetic fragments, might have even described the specific flavors of ambrosia preferred by Apollo's steeds, or the rituals involved in their celestial feeding. Perhaps Piroeus was partial to nectar with a hint of cinnamon, while Ethon preferred his ambrosia extra flaming. No, that's the low-grade ambrosia for Hermes' flying sandals. Apollo's horses get the premium blend, with extra solar sparkles. The fumes from this divine refueling could also be a factor. Imagine the byproducts of metabolizing pure divine energy. It might create unusual auroral displays, strange colors in the sky around the sun, or even mild, localized atmospheric disturbances. You might see a rainbow when there's no rain, or a peculiar golden haze that makes everything look slightly surreal for an hour or two. These would be puzzling phenomena, likely attributed to some divine activity, further reinforcing the idea that the sky was a busy place, full of gods and their sometimes messy business. The need to keep those celestial engines running, to feed the fiery beasts that pull the sun, adds another layer of delightful, if entirely speculative, complication to Apollo's daily commute, ensuring that the smooth passage of daylight is never quite as straightforward as it seems. It's another pit stop on the celestial highway, keeping your day interesting, if slightly unpredictable. Apollo's chariot has finally reached the western horizon, its fiery steeds now sated with their celestial superfuel, and hopefully no longer trailing ambrosia fumes across the twilight sky. The gates of the west swing open, and the sun god completes his daily journey, ready for a well-deserved night off. But even for a deity as powerful and generally autonomous as Apollo, there's one final, often overlooked, source of potential delay before his next day's work can even begin divine paperwork and cosmic bureaucracy. Yes, even the sun god might have had to file his daily route and purpose with the king of gods, Zeus, leading to pre-flight administrative holdups. This is, of course, a highly anachronistic and humorous take, but the idea of a divine hierarchy and a certain cosmic order managed by Zeus is central to Greek mythology. A mainstream historical fact is that Zeus was the supreme ruler of the Olympian gods, maintaining order, dispensing justice of a sort, and ensuring that the other deities generally stuck to their assigned roles and responsibilities. While Apollo had considerable freedom in his domain, he was still ultimately answerable to his father, Zeus. So picture this. It's just before dawn again, in those celestial stables we visited at the start of our journey. The Horai are getting the fiery steeds ready, but Apollo can't just leap into his chariot and zoom off. First, he might have to pop over to Zeus's celestial office on Mount Olympus, a grand, cloud-wreathed edifice, probably with a long queue of minor deities and importuning mortals already waiting outside. Apollo, being a top-tier god, probably gets to cut the line, but he still has to present his flight plan for the day. "Morning, Dad," he might say, unrolling a shimmering scroll. "Standard solar trajectory today. Planning Epsilon variant route over Attica to avoid that new temple Athena's building. The glare off the bronze roof is a nightmare. Expected arrival at Western Gates. 1800 hours Celestial Standard Time. Any objections?" Zeus, perhaps a bit grumpy before his first thunderbolt of the morning, might scrutinize the plan. "What's this about a brief, unscheduled stop for heroic inspiration over Crete? Apollo. We talked about those. Keep the divine interventions to a minimum. Son, it plays havoc with mortal planting schedules. And try not to scorch any more of Hera's prize peacocks when you're passing her gardens. All right. This divine back and forth, the celestial equivalent of getting your TPS report signed, could take a while, especially if Zeus has other pressing cosmic matters on his mind, like a Titan rebellion brewing or a particularly vexing argument with Hera about his latest mortal dalliance. Historians still argue about the degree to which the actions of individual Greek gods were seen as constrained by a higher divine will or cosmic fate versus being purely expressions of their own character and desires. While gods had immense power, there was often a sense that even they were subject to certain overarching principles or the ultimate authority of Zeus. This cosmic bureaucracy is our playful extension of that idea. Perhaps there were celestial regulations Apollo had to adhere to, speed limits in certain starry sectors, no-fly zones over particularly sacred or volatile areas, mandatory nectar emission controls for his steeds. Filing the paperwork to prove compliance could be a daily chore. Yes, Zeus, all 4 steeds passed their quarterly flame intensity tests. The reports are attached. Can I go now? The mortals are starting to look for their sandals. A quirky or fringe tidbit, imagine if there were specific divine permits required for certain solar activities. A permit for an unusually bright day, perhaps for a major festival. A permit for a slightly dimmer day if Apollo was feeling under the weather or wanted to encourage introspection among mortals. A special dispensation if he needed to arrive a bit late due to, say, an urgent lyre tuning emergency. The paperwork would be endless. Application for temporary solar flare increase, Form 30 Gamma, submitted in triplicate. Please allow 6 to 8 millennia for processing. It's a wonder the sun ever rose at all, if this were the case. This entirely imaginary layer of divine red tape, this need for Apollo to check in with the celestial head office before starting his vital work, serves as our final tongue-in-cheek example of how even the most fundamental cosmic processes could be subject to traffic delays. It emphasizes that even in a world governed by powerful, sometimes capricious gods, there's a desire for order, for accountability, for someone, somewhere, to be in charge and making sure things run mostly according to plan. So, as Apollo finally gets the divine go-ahead from Zeus, perhaps with a sigh and a reminder to try not to set anything on fire that isn't supposed to be on fire, he can at last embark on his daily journey. And you, the ancient Greek down below, can finally see that first glimmer of dawn, blissfully unaware of the celestial administrative hurdles that had to be cleared just to bring you another day. The divine bureaucracy, the ultimate unseen traffic controller, has given the green light. The celestial paperwork, we must imagine, Yken has been stamped with Zeus's official thunderbolt of approval, and Apollo's golden chariot has long since completed its fiery arc, vanishing into the welcoming stables of the West. The memory of his dazzling passage, with all its potential for blinding stumbles, divine pit stops, and heroically induced roadblocks, now begins to soften into the gentle narrative of a day concluded. The imagined hustle and bustle of the Olympian bureaucracy fades, leaving behind only the quiet stillness of your own personal twilight, the one that exists just behind your eyelids as you drift towards sleep. The need for celestial traffic reports and divine intervention alerts is over for now. The world outside your window, whether it looks out onto the quiet, moon-bathed hills of ancient Attica or the lamplit streets of a modern city, has settled into its nocturnal rhythm. The urgency of the sunset scramble has dissipated, replaced by a slower, more deliberate cadence. The chorus of daytime sounds, the distant clatter from the agora, the bleating of unseen sheep, the hypothetical squeak of an Olympian chariot wheel. All these now recede, replaced by the softer, more intimate sounds of your own quiet space. The gentle hum of a fan, the distant sigh of wind, the steady, reassuring beat of your own heart. Let the image of that brilliant, sometimes erratic, sun chariot fade like the last rays of sunset. There are no more constellations to navigate tonight, no more seasonal detours to ponder, no more concerns about whether Apollo might be distracted by a particularly enchanting melody or a damsel in distress. His work, and yours, for this day is done. The only journey remaining is the smooth, unimpeded glide into deep, restful slumber. The paths are clear. The way is peaceful. Allow your thoughts to slow their pace, to meander gently down quieter, shadier lanes, leaving behind the bright glare of wakefulness for the cool, comforting shadows of sleep. The only light now is the soft glow of your own inner tranquility, a gentle beacon guiding you towards rest. Sweet dreams, and may your celestial commute tomorrow be entirely uneventful.